My parents built Harrison Manufacturing from nothing. Dad started the company in 1989, manufacturing industrial equipment parts in a 3,000-square-foot warehouse. Mom handled the books, working from our kitchen table while raising 3 kids. By the time I was born, an unexpected 4th child when Mom was 41, they'd grown it to 15 employees and $2 million in annual revenue. My older siblings all joined the business. Daniel, the eldest at 42, ran operations. Catherine, 39, handled sales and marketing. Michael, 37, managed logistics and distribution. Then there was me, 29 years old, the afterthought child, the one who didn't fit the Harrison mold. You were always different, Mom would say, not unkindly but not exactly warmly either. More introspective. Less driven. What she meant, less interested in the family business. I showed interest once. At 15, I asked Dad if I could learn about the manufacturing process. He'd patted my head absently. That's nice, sweetie. Why don't you focus on your schoolwork? Your brothers and sister have the business covered. At 17, I suggested a new inventory tracking system after reading about supply chain optimization. Dad smiled indulgently. We've been doing this for 28 years. I think we know what works. By college, I'd stopped trying. I studied economics and finance at Northwestern, paid for by scholarships and student loans because the business needed capital more than I needed tuition help. My siblings had their education fully funded, but I was told I was more academically inclined anyway, and should appreciate the character-building experience of financial independence. I graduated with $87,000 in debt and a job offer from McKinsey & Company in Chicago. My family didn't attend graduation. There was a major client meeting that weekend that required all hands on deck. You understand, Mom had said on the phone. The business has to come first. You're doing great on your own anyway. I understood perfectly. At McKinsey, I specialized in operational restructuring and investment strategy. I was good at it, exceptionally good. I could look at a company's financials and see exactly where they were bleeding money, where opportunities existed, how to optimize everything from supply chains to capital allocation. By 24, I was a senior associate. By 26, I made partner, youngest in the Chicago office's history. My compensation package included profit sharing and equity stakes in various ventures. I invested aggressively, carefully, strategically. My family never asked about my work. When I came home for holidays, conversations revolved entirely around Harrison Manufacturing. Production numbers, client contracts, expansion plans, industry challenges. How's the consulting thing? Dad would ask occasionally, his attention already drifting back to Daniel's presentation about Q3 performance. It's good. Still traveling a lot? Some. That was the extent of his interest. What he didn't know, I'd accumulated $47 million in personal assets by age 28 through careful investments and aggressive saving. I lived in a modest 1-bedroom apartment in Lincoln Park, drove a 6-year-old Subaru, bought clothes from Nordstrom Rack. My family assumed I was doing fine, whatever that meant for someone in consulting. Must be nice having a stable job, Catherine said once, her tone suggesting stable meant mediocre. Not everyone has the stomach for business ownership. There's no shame in being an employee. I'd smiled and said nothing. In 2020, everything changed. The pandemic hit manufacturing hard. Harrison Manufacturing lost 3 major clients in 2 months. Revenue dropped 47%. Their credit lines, already stretched thin from an expansion into a second facility, were suddenly underwater. They were burning through cash reserves at an unsustainable rate. By May 2020, they were 60 days from insolvency. Michael called me. First time he'd called in 2 years. Maya, we're in trouble. Real trouble. The business might not survive this. How bad? We need $15 million just to make it through the next 6 months. The banks won't extend more credit. Our existing investors are pulling out. His voice cracked. Dad's talking about bankruptcy. What do you need from me? The pause was long. Do you have maybe $10,000 we could borrow? Just temporarily. I know it's a lot, but $10,000. To save a company that generated $34 million annually before the crash. Like asking for spare change. I don't have that liquid right now, I lied. But let me make some calls. I know people in private equity. Really? That would be incredible. We're desperate, Maya. I hung up and spent the weekend analyzing Harrison Manufacturing's financials. Michael had sent everything, desperate enough to overlook that his little sister probably couldn't help anyway. The company was struggling, but the fundamentals were sound. Good client relationships, solid reputation, quality products. The problem was cash flow and leverage, not the core business model. With proper capital injection and strategic restructuring, they could not only survive but thrive. I drafted an investment proposal through a private equity firm I'd been consulting with, Meridian Capital Partners. I structured it carefully. $30 million in capital injection in exchange for 51% equity and 3 board seats out of 5. The family would retain operational control and generous salaries, but all major strategic decisions would require board approval. My approval, though they'd never know it. Meridian Capital Partners was my entity. I'd established it 2 years earlier as a personal investment vehicle, named after the street where I'd grown up. Nothing obviously connected to me. Different address, corporate structure, layers of legal separation. I presented it to Michael as investors I know through work. The family was thrilled. Saved from bankruptcy, able to keep running the business, only giving up some equity to faceless investors who'd probably stay hands-off anyway. Dad announced it at a family dinner in June 2020. We found capital. Maya connected us with some investors who believe in our vision. We're going to make it through this. Everyone congratulated him for his business acumen in navigating the crisis. Catherine praised his negotiation skills. Daniel raised a toast to Dad's leadership during impossible times. I sat at the end of the table eating my chicken quietly, saying nothing. "Thank you for the introduction," Mom said to me, her tone warmly patronizing. "It's nice that your consulting contacts came through. See, your work can be useful even if you're not in the family business." "Happy to help," I replied simply. For the next 3 years, I watched through quarterly board meetings and financial reports. The company stabilized quickly. By Q4 2020, they were profitable again. By mid-2021, they'd exceeded pre-pandemic revenue. By 2023, they were hitting $52 million annually with healthy margins. My family attributed this entirely to their brilliant management. Dad's strategic vision. Daniel's operational excellence. Catherine's sales prowess. Michael's logistics optimization. The quarterly board meetings were held remotely, which meant I participated through my attorney as proxy for Meridian Capital. The family dealt with him, not me. They thought I was still just Maya, the consultant, completely unaware I was actually reviewing every decision they made. They hired 12 new employees without board approval. Minor violation, but I let it slide. They gave themselves 18% raises. Also without board approval. I made a note but didn't interfere. They purchased new company vehicles. A BMW for Dad, a Mercedes for Catherine, and Audi for Daniel. Listed as company cars, but primarily used personally. Another violation, but still within acceptable parameters. Then they started planning a major expansion without consulting the board. A $22 million project to build a third facility in Tennessee. They'd been negotiating for 6 months, already put down a $2 million deposit, signed preliminary contracts. The first board meeting where it was mentioned was 2 weeks before they planned to break ground. My attorney called me. They're moving forward on a major capital project without board authorization. That's a clear violation of the investment agreement. What are they saying when you raise concerns? Daniel says they don't need board approval for operational decisions. Catherine insists they're just informing us as a courtesy. Your father claims he's run this company for 34 years and knows what he's doing. Do they understand the board has final authority on expenditures over $5 million? They don't seem to think it applies to them. They're treating the investment agreement like a suggestion. I reviewed the Tennessee project details. The financials were shaky, overly optimistic projections, inadequate market research, unclear ROI timeline. They were making an emotional decision, not a business one. Schedule an in-person board meeting, I told my attorney. I'll attend. In person? You've never attended in person. Things are changing. Set it for next week. Don't tell them I'm coming. Just say Meridian Capital will have a representative present for the vote. They're not going to like this. They don't have to like it. They have to comply with it. The board meeting was scheduled for Thursday at 2 p.m. at Harrison Manufacturing headquarters, a building I'd visited exactly 3 times in 9 years, always as Dad's daughter, never as his majority shareholder. I arrived at 1:45 p.m. wearing a Tom Ford suit, carrying a Celine briefcase, looking every inch the private equity executive I actually was but had never shown them. I kept my sunglasses on as I walked through the lobby. The receptionist, new since my last visit, looked up. "Can I help you?" "Board meeting. Conference room A." "You're with Meridian Capital?" "Something like that." She directed me down the hall. The conference room door was open. I could hear voices inside, Dad's deep baritone, Catherine's confident laugh, Daniel's steady explanations. I pushed the door open. 4 faces turned toward me. Dad, Daniel, Catherine, Michael. Plus my attorney, James Rothstein, who was carefully controlling his expression. "Why, Catherine blinked. "What are you doing here?" "I'm here for the board meeting." "This is a business meeting," Daniel said slowly. "For actual company matters. Did you need something else?" "I'm here for the board meeting," I repeated, taking a seat at the table. "Shall we begin?" Dad looked confused. "Honey, this is about the Tennessee expansion. Very technical corporate stuff. You probably wouldn't find it interesting." "On the contrary, I find it extremely interesting. A $22 million capital project without board approval violates Section 7.3 of your investment agreement." Silence. Michael frowned. "How do you know about our investment agreement?" I removed my sunglasses, met his eyes. "I've read it very carefully." "James," Dad turned to my attorney, "can we get started? I'm not sure why Maya's here, but we have important business." "Ms. Harrison is here in her capacity as principal representative of Meridian Capital Partners," James said formally. The room went silent. "That's not funny," Catherine said finally. I opened my briefcase, removed a document, slid it across the table. "Corporate structure of Meridian Capital Partners. Note the principal shareholder and CEO." Dad picked it up, his hand starting to shake. His eyes scanned the page, then stopped. "This says, Maya Harrison, 100% equity holder, Chief Executive Officer, Board Chairman." "That's correct." "This is a joke," Daniel said, but his voice wavered. I slid another document across. "Investment agreement signed June 2020. $30 million capital injection in exchange for 51% equity in Harrison Manufacturing. Note the signature on behalf of Meridian Capital." My signature. My legal name in full. Catherine grabbed it, read it, looked up at me with dawning horror. You're the investor." "I'm the majority shareholder, yes. And this board meeting is to discuss your unauthorized Tennessee expansion." "How?" Michael's voice was barely a whisper. "Where did you get $30 million? "I earned it. Through my consulting thing that you never asked about." Dad's face had gone red. "You've been lying to us for 3 years." "I've never lied once. I simply didn't volunteer information you never asked for. You assumed I was barely making ends meet in consulting. That assumption was yours, not mine. You let us think. I let you think what you wanted to think. Just like you let me think I wasn't important enough to fund my college education, or attend my graduation, or include in business discussions. Everyone makes assumptions." James cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should address the Tennessee project?" "Yes," I said crisply. "The $22 million expansion you've planned without board authorization. Walk me through the projections." Daniel, still in shock, mechanically opened his presentation. He went through the numbers, the market analysis, the timeline. I listened for 20 minutes, then held up my hand. "Stop. Your market analysis is based on 2019 data. Your competitor assessment ignores 3 new manufacturers that opened in the Southeast since 2021. Your labor cost projections are 22% below current market rates. And your timeline assumes permit approvals in 90 days when the Tennessee average is 6 months. How do you?" "Because I'm good at my job. This project is structured will lose money. Minimum $4 million in the first 2 years, possibly more." "You don't understand our industry," Dad said, finding his voice. "We've been in manufacturing for 34 years. And I've been restructuring manufacturing operations for 8 years. I've consulted on 47 projects exactly like this. 31 succeeded, 16 failed. This one, as planned, would fail. Catherine leaned forward. So what do you suggest? Cancel it. No. Restructure it. Smaller initial facility, phased expansion, revised labor strategy, updated vendor contracts. I have a revised proposal that makes this project viable. I slid a deck across the table. 40 pages of detailed analysis, revised projections, implementation timeline. I'd prepared it over 3 days. They read in silence. This would work, Daniel admitted finally. It's more conservative, but the numbers are solid. It would also cost $14 million, not $22 million. Which means we can fund it without additional capital raises. What about the deposit we already paid? Michael asked. On a preliminary site that's overpriced by $1.3 million? Consider it a learning experience. I've identified 3 better locations. We can forfeit the deposit and still come out ahead. Dad stared at the proposal. You did this in 3 days? I do this professionally. This is what I've been doing while you thought I was making PowerPoints for corporate clients. How much do you make? Catherine asked bluntly. Last year, $8.7 million. This year's on track for $11 million. The number landed like a physical blow. That's more than the entire executive team combined, Michael said weakly. Yes. Why didn't you tell us? Mom's voice came from the doorway. I hadn't noticed her arrive. She stood frozen, looking at me like I was a stranger. Why would I? You never asked. You never showed interest in my work beyond, how's the consulting thing? You assumed I was average at best, probably struggling in my expensive Chicago apartment, making maybe $100,000 a year if I was lucky. We would have been proud, Mom said. Would you? Or would you have been uncomfortable that your afterthought daughter was more successful than your golden children? Silence answered that. The Tennessee Project, I said, returning to business. We vote now. All in favor of the revised proposal. James raised his hand immediately. He represented my 51% controlling stake. I raised my own hand. That's 3 board seats out of 5. Motion passes. The project moves forward under the revised structure. Wait, Dad said. We don't get a say? You had a say. You chose not to exercise it through proper channels by presenting the project to the board before making commitments. Now the board is exercising its authority. This is our company, Catherine said, but without heat. She looked dazed. 49% yours. 51% mine. That's how majority equity works. You're going to take over everything, Daniel said. Control all our decisions. No. I'm going to do what I've been doing for 3 years. Provide capital, strategic oversight, and approval on major decisions. You'll continue running daily operations. But this fantasy where you're independent owners who just happen to have silent investors? That ends now. Because of one mistake? Michael asked. Because of 3 years of mistakes that I've been monitoring and allowing because they weren't catastrophic. The unauthorized hiring. The excessive executive compensation. The personal use of company vehicles. The travel expenses that were 40% personal. I've watched all of it. Dad's face went from red to white. I let it slide because the company was performing well and the violations were technically minor. But the Tennessee project crossed a line. You were about to blow $22 million on a poorly planned expansion because you didn't want to ask permission from faceless investors. What do you want? Dad asked, his voice defeated. Compliance. Respect for the investment structure. Acknowledgement that I'm not your daughter playing at business. I'm your majority shareholder who saved you from bankruptcy. We would have found other investors, Catherine said weakly. You tried for 3 months in 2020. Everyone turned you down. I was your last option and you didn't even know it was me. The truth of that statement settled over the room. The Tennessee project moves forward under the revised plan, I continued. But there will be changes to prevent future violations. Monthly board meetings instead of quarterly. All expenditures over $50,000 require advance approval. Executive compensation will be tied to performance metrics. And company vehicles will be actually used for company business or purchased personally. You're punishing us, Daniel said. I'm implementing standard corporate governance that should have existed from day one. These are normal structures for any company with external investors. But you're not external, Mom said quietly. You're family. Am I? Because for 29 years I've been the family member you barely included. The one not worth funding through college. The one whose career was nice, but not interesting enough to ask about. The one who didn't fit the Harrison mold. That's not fair, Catherine protested. Neither was assuming I had nothing to offer. Neither was dismissing my suggestion about inventory systems at 17. Neither was missing my graduation because the business came first. Neither was calling me stable instead of successful because I didn't join the family company. No one had a response. I stood gathering my materials. James will send the revised Tennessee proposal and new governance structure by tomorrow morning. We'll meet monthly first Thursday 10 a.m. Attendance is mandatory for all board members and executive team. Wait, Dad said. Just wait. Can we talk about this as a family? We are talking about it. At a board meeting. Which is the appropriate venue for discussing company business. I mean really talk. Not like this. Not so formal and cold. I looked at him for a long moment. You have 3 other children in this room. Talk to them about how it feels to have your contributions dismissed. I'm sure they can't relate, but maybe they'll try. I walked toward the door. Aya, please. Mom's voice stopped me. We didn't know. We didn't understand. If we had known. If you had known, would you have treated me differently? Or would you have resented that your late-in-life accident baby was more successful than your planned children? Her face crumpled. I'll see you Thursday, I said and walked out. The drive back to Chicago gave me 3 hours to think about family power and the weight of being underestimated for an entire lifetime. They called. All of them. Dozens of times over the next week. I let every call go to voicemail. Dad's messages evolved from confused to angry to pleading. You owe us a conversation. This is ridiculous. You're tearing this family apart. Please, Maya, just talk to us. Catherine's messages were defensive. You're being vindictive. This isn't about business, it's about revenge. We made mistakes, but this is excessive. Daniel's were analytical. We can work this out. Let's find a compromise. There must be a way to restructure this that works for everyone. Michael's were the most honest. I'm sorry. We were wrong. About everything. Please don't destroy what Dad built. I didn't respond to any of them. Thursday morning, I arrived at Harrison Manufacturing at 9:45 a.m. The receptionist recognized me this time. Ms. Harrison, they're waiting in the conference room. The entire executive team was present 15 minutes early. All of them looked like they'd lost sleep. I took my seat at the head of the table. No longer Dad's seat, but mine as board chairman. Let's begin. Daniel, operations report. The meeting lasted 3 hours. I asked detailed questions about every department, challenged every assumption, pointed out inefficiencies they'd overlooked. I demonstrated exactly how much I knew about their business, more than they did in many areas. By the end, they'd accepted my revised organizational structure, new approval processes, and performance-based compensation model. One more thing, I said as we concluded. Family dynamics. Everyone tensed. This doesn't change outside the office. I'm still your daughter, your sister. But here in this building, I'm the majority shareholder and board chairman. Those roles don't conflict unless you make them conflict. How do we make this work? Dad asked quietly. By recognizing reality. I'm not the underachieving youngest child. I never was. I was the one you underestimated so completely that I ended up owning half your company without you realizing it. We're sorry, Mom said. Truly, deeply sorry. Sorry you were wrong, or sorry for how you treated me? Both, she said, and her voice shook. Both, Maya. I looked at each of them in turn. Here's what happens now. The business operates under proper corporate governance. You continue running operations, I provide strategic oversight. We meet monthly, maintain proper board structure, follow established procedures. And nobody makes jokes about my consulting thing, or my stable job, or treats my career like a cute hobby. Agreed, Dad said immediately. Outside the office we're family. But that means actual family, where my achievements matter as much as everyone else's. Where my graduation is worth attending. Where my work is interesting enough to ask about. Where I'm not an afterthought or a disappointment for not joining the family business. You were never a disappointment, Catherine said. I was always a disappointment. Just be honest about it. The daughter who didn't want to work with Dad, who studied finance instead of engineering, who moved to Chicago instead of staying local. I didn't fit your vision of family unity. She couldn't deny it. But here's the thing, I continued. I built something bigger than any of you while you weren't paying attention. I saved your company when you had nowhere else to turn. I've been protecting your business for 3 years while you thought I was making PowerPoints. And I did it all without asking for recognition, without demanding appreciation, without making it about ego. Why? Michael asked. Why save us if we treated you so badly? Because you're still my family. And because I could. I had the resources and expertise you needed, and despite everything, I didn't want to watch Dad lose his life's work. Even though we didn't deserve it, Daniel said quietly. Deserve has nothing to do with it. It was the right business decision. Good fundamentals, fixable problems, clear path to profitability. The fact that it was family was secondary. Dad looked at me with something like awe. When did you become this person? I've always been this person. You just never looked closely enough to see it. The meeting ended. As everyone filed out, Dad hung back. Maya, he said. I failed you. As a father, as a mentor. I was so focused on building something with Daniel and Catherine and Michael that I never saw what you were building on your own. No, you didn't. But we can't change the past. Can we change the future? I considered that. Maybe. If you actually mean it. If this isn't just fear of losing your company talking. It's not. I'm proud of you. I should have been proud of you all along, but I'm proud of you now. What you've built, who you've become, it's remarkable. Thank you, I said and meant it. Will you come to dinner Sunday? Family dinner, not business. Just us. Will there be a seating chart? He smiled sadly. You can sit wherever you want. Then I'll be there. Sunday dinner was awkward but genuine. They asked about my work. Really asked, wanting actual details. I told them about my projects, my strategies, my career progression. Catherine listened with grudging respect. You made partner at 26? That's insane. It's what happens when you're good at your job and don't have family connections to rely on. She winced but nodded. Daniel asked about my investment strategy. I explained portfolio theory, risk assessment, market analysis. He took notes. Michael wanted to know about my life in Chicago. I told him about my apartment, my friends, my surprisingly normal existence for someone worth $156 million. You're worth what? Dad choked on his wine. $156 million. Well, $157 million as of Friday's market close. The number hung in the air. And you drive a Subaru, Catherine said slowly. It's reliable and efficient. Why would I drive something else? Because you can afford literally anything. Affording something and needing it are different things. I learned that from watching the business nearly collapse because you expanded too fast and burned through cash on non-essentials. Dad nodded slowly. Fair point. The dinner ended with tentative new understanding. Not forgiveness, that would take time. But acknowledgement. Recognition. The beginning of actually seeing me. 6 months later, the Tennessee facility opened under the revised plan. On budget, on schedule, profitable within 4 months. Harrison Manufacturing hit $61 million in revenue that year. Executive compensation increased, but now tied to performance metrics that actually mattered. I attended monthly board meetings, provided strategic guidance, challenged assumptions. But I let them run operations, make tactical decisions, lead their teams. At family gatherings, they included me in business discussions. Not as a courtesy, but as the person with majority control and strategic expertise. Maya, what do you think about the Wisconsin opportunity? Dad would ask. I'd give my analysis. Sometimes they agreed, sometimes we debated. But they listened. A year after the revelation, Catherine called. I want to apologize. Really apologize, not just say sorry because you own the company. I'm listening. We treated you terribly. For your entire life. We made you feel less than, like you didn't matter, like your path was inferior to ours. And the worst part is we didn't do it maliciously, we just genuinely believed it. We thought our way was the only way and anything else was settling. That's honest. I was especially cruel. All those comments about stable jobs, about being an employee, about not having the stomach for business ownership. I was so confident in my superiority that I never considered I might be wrong. You weren't superior. You just had a louder platform. I know that now. And I'm sorry. Genuinely, deeply sorry. Thank you, I said. That actually means something. 2 years after the revelation, Dad asked me to take over as CEO. You're better at this than any of us, he said simply. The company's thrived under your strategic direction. You should be leading it officially. I don't want to be CEO. He looked surprised. Why not? Because I have my own career that I love. I'm not interested in running operations. I'm interested in strategic investment. That's what I'm good at, what I enjoy. You need an operator, not a strategist in the CEO role. Then what should we do? Hire a professional CEO. Someone with manufacturing experience and operational excellence. Keep Daniel as COO, Catherine as Chief Sales Officer, Michael as Head of Logistics. But bring in outside expertise for the top role. You'd be okay with that? I'd prefer it. I'm the board chairman and majority shareholder. That's where I add value, governance and strategy, not daily operations. We hired Jennifer Wu, a manufacturing veteran with 20 years of experience. She was brilliant, decisive, and completely unintimidated by family dynamics. Harrison Manufacturing hit $78 million in revenue her first year. $94 million her second year. My family learned to operate in a proper corporate structure. They learned that expertise matters more than bloodline. They learned that the quiet daughter they dismissed for 29 years was the reason they still had a business. And I learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction. It's succeeding so completely that everyone has to acknowledge they were wrong. It's saving the people who dismissed you, then making them work within structures you control. It's proving your worth so undeniably that they can't explain it away or minimize it or pretend it doesn't exist. 3 years after that board meeting, I sat at Thanksgiving dinner at my parents' house. The table was full, 32 people across 3 generations. Dad stood to make a toast. I want to acknowledge someone special. Maya, our youngest, who I failed to appreciate for most of her life. Who built an extraordinary career while we weren't paying attention. Who saved our family business when we had nowhere else to turn. Who's taught us that success comes in many forms, and sometimes the quietest person in the room is the most powerful. Everyone raised their glasses. I smiled, accepted the recognition, and thought about the girl who sat outside Dad's office at 7 years old, wanting to learn about business, being told it was too complicated. She'd learned anyway. She'd learned so well that she ended up owning the business outright, controlling the family's entire financial future, respected and acknowledged and finally seen. Keep your pocket change, Dad had said. Turned out my pocket change was $30 million that saved his entire company. Turned out their real investors were me all along. Turned out the daughter they dismissed was the only reason they still had anything to dismiss her from. That's not irony. That's justice. And sometimes, justice is simply letting people discover that their assumptions were wrong, their dismissals were short-sighted, and the person they underestimated was the one holding all the power. I didn't need to destroy them. I just needed them to finally see me clearly. And now they did. Every single day,